Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is useful human Arif Hassan. Arif, it's a magical time of year.
It's my Super Bowl. That's for sure.
Yep. Thanksgiving is Arif's Super Bowl. That is what we can take away from today's adventure through the review of the Bears game, which was not pleasant to watch, a preview of the Packers game, which should prove to be a little easier to swallow, and then, of course, our Thanksgiving-themed mailbag. I like how your takes on Turkey have really just made the Thanksgiving episode must listen to.
Yeah, no, it's really, it draws, I think, maybe the most discussion. It brings out the passion, of our listeners. Unfortunately, because many of them are wrong.
We like our listeners. They're just so often wrong about their beliefs and the things their family has done for generations and generations.
Yeah, it's weird how they're sensitive to that.
Yeah, I don't know what to say on that. I will say, however, that I did get a couple comments on my voice last episode. People were wondering if A, I was sick, or B, if I was trying out some new overnight jazz sound. I was actually, when I heard the third comment on it, I was like, I went to listen back and I was like, welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings.
I did not notice that at all. That's great.
Up next, we're going to listen to some Mingus here. And right after that, we're going to, I wasn't meaning to do that. I was a little sick, yes. I wasn't trying to debut some sort of overnight jazz, smooth, FM sort of thing or AM sort of thing. So just for the record, you can look forward to this exciting voice or something, and not the overnight voice going forward unless I'm super sick or just feeling like I need to be playing, Barry White or something in studio. We'll see how that goes. But before we start, just want to thank you guys so much for listening and helping out with Patreon and PayPal over the years. Again, thank you guys so much for listening and spreading the word about the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. We do have a new donation to speak of this week. It's via Patreon, and thank you, Jason Bouleg, and really do appreciate that. If you would like to donate to the show, you can do so in one of two different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode, or you can go to paypal.me/NorseCode as well. Patreon is, of course, more of a subscription base. It does help us more long term as far as being able to keep the lights on, keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay, handling any sort of overhead, and probably some advertising moving forward. So again, thank you guys so much. We really do appreciate it. Again, thank you, Jason, so much. Last episode, we did talk about the whole advertising thing. If you do have, if you would like to hear more about that rant, you can listen to episode 257 and listen to the first couple minutes of that. I believe it's at minute mark 2 or 3 or something, where we're talking about a potential move. If you do have opinions on the addition of ads to Norse Code, again, the decision has not been made final. You can send us just a quick message at norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. Again, thank you guys so much for listening, and let's get into the show. And the Bears game happened, and I think that's the nicest thing we can possibly say about it. Depending on who you listen to, either the offense is trash, the defense is trash, except for the one player who picked off Mitch Trubisky twice, or depending on who you listen to, Mitch Trubisky is the second coming of Aaron Rodgers. Where should we even start with this?
There's a lot, right? Because the Bears are a good team. The Vikings have not beaten a good team. They've gotten kind of close, right? They got close to the Saints. They got close to the Rams. The Eagles don't count anymore because they just keep losing. So great.
Yeah, we may have to talk about Carson Wentz's no good, very bad day.
May. Okay. So we've got first of all, we've got a couple of people who not been listening to the show for years, and they write in every so often.
Oh yes.
And so someone asked, "Hey, I don't get it. Does Arif hate NDSU or something?" I'm not. Yes, absolutely, unreservedly. It's the college bias I have. It's weird. I grew up in Grand Forks. It's kind of a bit, honestly. But it emerged kind of organically.
It's more of a thing against Carson Wentz than it is really about NDSU football. But
it ended up, it moved in that direction, then took on a life of its own. So that's where we're at. So I think that with the Vikings defense, They played largely pretty well. Obviously, the opening drive, I think, should and does leave a sour taste in everyone's mouth. And then, I think the first 3 drives, I think, all together just feel pretty bad. Felt like they were converting every third down. They were able to get to the Vikings with trick plays and stuff like that. And those are all, I think, obvious and very sincere concerns. But for most of the game, the Vikings defense actually played pretty well. I think in the first quarter, the Bears were I want to say 3 of 3 on third downs, or at least within the first couple of drives, they were 3 for 3 on third downs. And that ended up, and then 3 of 4 because of the field goal, and then they converted a couple more. And then they didn't convert third downs after that. The Vikings defense only allowed 3 points on offensive drives in the second half. 5 if you want to ding them for the 2-point conversion, but obviously they weren't responsible for the pick 6 in the first place. So all of that kind of in mind, that's pretty good. Trubisky, I don't think played particularly well. He played, I think, to the scouting report that me and Lauren kind of put together, that he's kind of inconsistent. He's likely to throw these kinds of picks. He ended up throwing a couple of picks, almost threw another one to Xavier Rhodes. And I think a lot of that's credit to the Vikings defense. They were doing a very good job getting pressure on him. The biggest issue, of course, is that very often he would escape pressure, turn it into a scramble, and the Vikings kind of lost contain. And so there's kind of 2 responses there. The first is it's called mush rushing. It's kind of how LSU was able to stop Johnny Manziel a couple of times, which is where they don't necessarily – they prioritize lane control or gap control more than pressure, although they'll still try to get pressure, but it still significantly diminishes your ability to get pressure. The second, of course, is to put a spy on the quarterback. And I don't like the first one because I think the Vikings were doing a very, very good job of getting pressure and would alter kind of his throw a lot in cases where he would want to throw and make life difficult for him. The second I like, but obviously it comes with its own concerns. When you got a spy on a quarterback, that means you've either got one less pass rusher because you're not blitzing, or one less player in coverage. So those are all kind of the sacrifices you have to make. The Vikings ended up putting a spy on Trubisky. It was Jaron Kearse for the most part, which interesting choice, but it worked out because after that, he didn't scramble very well at all. And that was kind of late in the second quarter. It's not really a halftime adjustment. It was like a pre-halftime adjustment. And then, of course, Zimmer said in the halftime interview on the sideline that we've got to do that. And some people were like, I can't believe you weren't doing it before. And he was. But it did arrive kind of late. But I thought the Vikings defense largely played pretty well. I think there's some problems with Eric Kendricks. I think he committed an out-of-bounds penalty, which I would have liked to see a replay for. But even after you kind of, if he hits him inbounds, you can kind of see why, if the ref was incorrect in throwing the flag, why he threw the flag anyway. And I guess you didn't need to hit him. I don't personally like those penalties when they're kind of borderline, but I get it, and that's a legitimate point of criticism for Kendricks. Eric Wilson had a lot of trouble getting to his gap assignment on outside runs, especially when they pulled the blocker. You can even see kind of, I think, the Taylor Gabriel sweep. He had a very, very difficult time getting outside of his blocker, which sucks, right? Because he's supposed to be this really fast, really quick linebacker that should be able to do that. But that caused some issues in the run game. And just in general, it felt like there was some miscommunication between Wilson and Kendricks. Early on, there was a little bit of miscommunication between Rhodes and Smith. It seemed like they kind of resolved that pretty quickly. But these, I think, are kind of smaller criticisms over the larger fact that outside of the first scripted drive, the Vikings defense did really well. And I think if they allow, I guess you want to subtract 8, right? So 17 points. They allow 17 points and generate a couple turnovers. That's good. That just is unqualified a good game level performance. And so it really should be about, the conversation should be about the offense and what it means that the offense performed poorly, because sometimes offenses perform poorly and it's not meaningful. I think the Bills game, it was just kind of one of those, I don't know if this means anything. There's a lot of stuff in here that's probably not repeatable or whatever, and you can kind of fix it going forward. But yeah, the offense, I think, was the bigger problem. A lot of 3-and-outs, a lot of punting just in general, and being forced to settle for field goals either inside or just outside of the red zone. So that's where my bigger concern is.
Yeah, the offense seemed to not know exactly what to do with the Bears defense out there. At times it seemed both lacking in imagination and completely overwhelmed by the Bears defensive line.
Yeah, I mean, some of it's a talent problem, right? I mean, Khalil Mack is just good and the tackles are not.
He's just going to push a guy into a guy to make a tackle. That's just his style.
That's just who he is. And so sometimes the big issue, of course, is that they didn't have David Morgan healthy for the game. And, he'd be that guy you'd ask to help in that situation. And so they actually moved CJ Ham into that role a lot, which was a really smart decision, I think, because I don't think, Dalvin Cook or Kyle Rudolph would be as helpful in that situation, even though it's mostly just a chip. You kind of want your guys who are kind of best enabled to block to do that. But it seemed like, so there's like some criticisms of the play calling I get. Like a lot of people were criticizing the play calling for being too conservative. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. But, saying, hey, the play calling didn't really have a good plan for Khalil Mack, I'm sympathetic to. I mean, like on one hand, it's Khalil Mack. I mean, he is playing about as well as, like, say, Aaron Donald or any other Defensive Player of the Year candidate. He played this game better than Danielle Hunter did. And actually, someone a day before the game or a couple hours before the game asked me, who do you think is better, Khalil Mack or Danielle Hunter? And I said, I don't think there's much of a question. I think Khalil Mack is better. Hunter is just performing more. He's generating more production. And I think Hunter can reach that level of dominance, but he's not there. And I think this game kind of indicated to us kind of how that can be the case, because Mack was just devastating. And he had like I think for the first, for a portion of the first couple of drives, I think Sam Ekstrom tweeted out, Khalil Mack has had an impact on like half of the plays that the Vikings ran. So some of it is, how do you have a plan for Khalil Mack? But some of it is like, well, you just have to. Right? Like, you just have to figure it out. In college, Jadeveon Clowney, sometimes you'll get triple teamed. You can't do that in the NFL, especially when they've got Akeem Hicks on the line. But they ran like one screen pass. Like, obviously, so that screen pass, or tunnel screen, really, that screen was a failure in like a really big way. But that doesn't necessarily mean because of that you go away from it. You need to find some way to mitigate that pass rush. And for the most part, it wasn't like a game where he was under pressure. Kirk Cousins was under pressure 50% of the time. He was under pressure 38, maybe 35% of the time, which is about the average, which is pretty awful for an average. It's like fourth in the NFL, but it's also the worst year the NFL has had in terms of pressure rate on quarterbacks. So that all kind of needs to be taken into consideration. Even with Khalil Mack and Akeem Hicks in the game, by the end of the day, Cousins wasn't under more pressure than he has been for most of the season. The difference is it's easy to remember the pressure when it occurs early in the game than the pressure that occurs later in the game when it feels like the game is out of hand, because that pressure was around more often earlier than it was later. And the Vikings moving to kind of a no-huddle offense did help resolve that. So then the second criticism that a lot of people have of the play calling is, why don't you go no-huddle more often? And that's also what I'm super sympathetic to, because like the no-huddle offense is superior, as it is for most teams. But it's also one that I think we need to at least be a little bit cautious in terms of making. I'm not saying it's an illegitimate criticism at all. Well, what I'm saying is that sometimes the context makes that criticism not super appropriate, because offensive coordinators know that their no-huddle offense performs better. That's why they use it. Like, if the no-huddle offense performed worse in 2-minute drills, they would huddle. Like, you need to be able to execute quickly and efficiently in 2-minute situations. That's why you have a no-huddle offense. So then the question is, okay, if it's more effective, why don't you use it more often? And part of that is because no-huddle offenses tend to have very small playbooks. And the reason for that is because you need to communicate the play quickly, efficiently, and clearly to the team without a huddle. So you need to be able to shout out a word, and that's your play. And not many plays in a playbook have one word. They tend to have, these 20 words, because players have to memorize all of the concepts of the play. So all of the names for the route combinations, the names of the protections, the names of your option routes, all of those things, right? That kind of go into it. And so So you can have 800 plays in your playbook, but only have to memorize a certain number of concepts because those are the words that you're going to use, right? So you've got your formation words and you've got your protection words and you've got your route words and so on. And those are the words you have to memorize. And then you can spit out any play and players kind of know what that looks like. Obviously, they have to practice those plays because you have to adjust differently based on defenses that are particular to each play. But the point is that memorizing those words to get out those play calls is more efficient than memorizing all 800 plays. When you get down to the level of memorizing a bunch of individual plays tagged to one word, and those words have to be distinct from each other, right? Like you can't have one play be called blah and the other one be called blur. Otherwise, people would get confused, right? So you need to have them all audibly distinct from each other. They all need to be one word, and you have to memorize the whole play in the one word. And so there's not a ton of room for that. And you can't just keep repeating plays necessarily because that won't always work. It worked for the Vikings against New Orleans in the playoff game last year. They ran the same play like 3 times. But that's kind of the issue, right? That they ran the same play 3 times. It just happened to work out one of those times. So you think back on the hurry-up situation that the Vikings were in those final drives against New Orleans and realize the reason that they ran the same play that many times is because they don't have that big of a playbook. That's under a different offensive coordinator, Pat Shurmur, that people generally agree is pretty good, or was pretty good for the Vikings at least. So that's why you don't go no huddle all that often, because you'll reduce the efficiency of your no huddle in situations that require more quickness, urgency and hurry up drills. And so, you can have larger no huddle playbooks. That does occur. I mean, that's how the K-gun offense was run way back in the 90s with Buffalo. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. But even the Patriots have like 6 plays in their no huddle playbook in a given week. And so you just don't want to give your defense the keys to the test when you get into no huddle mode. So I want to say it is fair to say, hey, we should go more no huddle more often, but you have to recognize that possibility is harder than it sounds. So I'll say that. But that's a fair criticism of the offense from a play calling perspective. From a player execution perspective, there were obviously a couple of problems. Zimmer mentioned today, and kind of the beat writers interpreted that one of the picks that Cousins threw, the one to Rudolph, so not the pick 6, was a result of a miscommunication between Rudolph and Cousins. And the other pick, Cousins, I think, just read the coverage wrong. He thought that the corner, he said it too. He thought the cornerback would stay flat to take on Diggs instead of moving. This is a classic cover 2 route. So he threw essentially a corner route. It doesn't feel like a corner route because Treadwell had a flat cut instead of an angled cut. Because in corner routes, it's like a 45, you go up and then you go 45 degrees to the sideline, and Treadwell looked like he was going to cut 90 degrees. So it's not quite a corner route, but it's the same concept. You've got an outside route going a little bit deep, and you've got a player up into the outside short. It's a cover 2 look, so the cornerback who is underneath is in conflict. Either he takes that receiver going up, or he takes the receiver in the flat, and the safety is traditionally too far away because it's a cover 2, and that's called, I think John Gruden calls it the turkey hole or whatever, but it's the cover 2 hole that people attack with corner routes all the time. Teddy was phenomenal at throwing these. It was like his favorite route. So he read the coverage correctly, but he didn't read the cornerback correctly. The corner moved up, and that complicated. Also it feels like Treadwell was maybe a little bit late, but Treadwell moved up, and he should have thrown it to Diggs, or the corner moved up, and he should have thrown it to Diggs probably, and that's something he said. So there's an execution standpoint where some of the players miscommunicated. That's a big problem, and it's difficult to kind of pin down what the problem with miscommunication is, right? If you've got the same offensive coordinator and the same players and a new quarterback, you could say it's probably the quarterback. If you've got the same offensive player, the same offensive coordinator, the same quarterback in a new offensive player like a receiver, it's probably the receiver. You could say that. If you've got a new offensive coordinator, the same, et cetera, the same quarterback, same receiver, then there might just be a disconnect over what the offense kind of asks them to do. And so it might be on the communication of the, but you've got, essentially it's all 3, right? Because you've got a new offensive coordinator and a new quarterback and a receiver who's not been in the offense all that much and had a lot of trouble learning the offense kind of through the years, it's difficult, right? I'm referring to Treadwell, not Rudolph, but it's difficult to say if there was a miscommunication there that it's on any of them. With Rudolph, of course, he's learning a new offense. He's got a new quarterback. It's just difficult to figure out who the miscommunication is on, but obviously it kind of needs to be resolved. So those are some of the issues. I think that some other issues just include, the talent level of the offensive line. That's tough, right? You just can't win against Akeem Hicks and Khalil Mack often enough to say, if you've got that level of talent, often enough to say that you've got kind of a safe, clean pocket. But, I thought Cousins made a number of mistakes aside from those interceptions. I think that there were accuracy issues. Diggs and Thielen played really well. Obviously not many people, including me, saw much of Thielen in the first half, especially the first quarter. So I can't evaluate just his route running or whether or not he looks like he's, free of injury or not. But Diggs played a phenomenal game. Obviously that overthrow to him feels like it kind of changed the course of the template of the game. Certainly changed the mood, I think, for a lot of Vikings fans. But
it was hard not to be bitter about that one moment in time. Just, this is perfect. Wow, that's a hell of a time you picked to throw it to throw it into the stands, huh?
Right? Yeah, it's like, what do we get rid of Teddy for if we're just going to overthrow deep balls anyway? A rare moment where Arif criticizes Teddy Bridgewater.
Well, I'll make sure to note this on the in the show notes where we have the timing issue or the timing thing.
Right. But it's. I mean that hurts, right? But that's just one mistake, right? Like you could get over it if the Vikings performed offensively elsewhere. And then I didn't even talk about the run blocking. I mean, that was just abysmal, right? I mean, I think both running backs ended up with like 1.6 yards a carry. Amir Abdullah may have had like the longest play of the day for a running back, like of all people. I mean, all the receivers, except for maybe Treadwell, who I don't think played awfully, but just didn't play well. But like Chad Beebe played well. Aldrick Robinson played well.
Aldrick Robinson is on this ridiculous ratio of catches to touchdowns right now.
Yeah, he's got I want to say 11 targets, or maybe he entered the game with 11 targets, 7 catches, and 3 touchdowns, just an insane touchdown rate. And then he got another target, catch, and touchdown, which, okay. Save some for the rest of us, buddy. He's like a touchdown vulture wide receiver, right? It's you got to play Matt Asiata because they'll take Jerick McKinnon out and put Matt Asiata in the goal line, and then he'll get 3 touchdowns and save your fantasy. You'll get 20 total yards and you'll get 3 touchdowns. Same thing with Robinson. Just pick him up in your GPP DFS leagues so you can just shoot for the moon.
I remember a year when Michael Bush, I think it was Michael Bush.
Yeah, it was Michael Bush. Yeah,
Michael Bush was the goal line back for Chicago. Anytime they
they'd take Matt Forte out and put Michael Bush in.
Which wouldn't make any sense as a conventional thing, but he just kept making it into the touchdown. I think he had 10 touchdowns that year, 7. Just he's going to either get you 2 points or he's going to get you 20.
Right.
And you just had to ride that wave. So,
well, I mean, LeGarrette Blount got 18 touchdowns in a year once, 18 touchdowns and fewer than 500 yards. Yeah. Just okay. So that's Aldrick Robinson. He is LeGarrette Blount. He's Michael Bush. Brandon Jacobs. Yeah, that's who he is.
Yeah. Kirk Cousins. A lot of the criticism comes obviously because of the gigantic contract, and you go, okay, well, this is the sort of game that he was brought in to win, and the scenario being down at the half, this is why he was brought in, to be able to be a game manager and take care of this. How much of this is shouldered on on the shoulders of Kirk Cousins?
I'm going to want to rewatch specifically those drives, but my impression is a lot. I don't know, there's a lot of disconnect, right? Everybody gets to blame everybody, and there's good reason for it. But when evaluating Cousins specifically, I want to say first, I don't think this is evidence that the Vikings overpaid him. I think he is performing an above average quarterback that has a number of flaws. This is one of his flaws. This is the reason you're not paying him $35 a year. It's why you're paying him $27 a year, and why he couldn't get $30 from the Vikings. He could only get $27, even though he leveraged a $30 million deal from the Jets, who I guess were more desperate, and they were more desperate. They had a lack of talent elsewhere. So, Yeah, this is what you paid for. You didn't overpay. Certainly, obviously, you're not underpaying. You're getting a guy who, in 80% of situations on the field, will perform like a top 5 quarterback, and the other 20% will perform like a top 20. Quite if we're going to be generous, a top 20 quarterback in a 32 quarterback league, in theory. I guess with the Buccaneers, it's like 33 quarterbacks, but
and
and the Saints,
and
right?
the Saints, and well, yeah, the Saints especially.
Yeah.
Well, now that they're taking Breeze out at like halftime. Yeah.
Right. I can't believe you tried scoring. Teddy is in. I don't know what you want.
I do know somebody who has drafted or who's now added Bridgewater to his fantasy league just for like, well, he's probably going to get like 14 points.
Right.
He had Alex Smith, and that ship has sailed.
Yeah, right. Yeah, do you think? Well, I guess it's past the trade deadline. Otherwise, that would have been really phenomenal, right? For Washington to trade for Teddy, so he could trade it like 4 times in a year.
Exactly, and be like, but I don't want to go
to Washington.
We're looking at a potential number 1 seed. Like, why would I want to leave?
But yeah, I think that Cousins treats these 2-minute situations very much like he treats other situations. And the problem, actually, I thought in some respects he was better this game than most of the time. But the problem is you can't, right? You have to prioritize sideline throws and time management, which in the halftime drive, I felt like he did a little bit, but he didn't push downfield enough, and he didn't kind of understand what he was going to see. I also thought, so this was interesting. The Diggs staying in bounds is not something that bothers me too much. I mean, he probably should have just went outside.
In the moment, you want to yell, go to the outside.
Right. But I don't think the Vikings should have called a timeout there.
You think that was a run up to the line, spend 15 seconds, adjust, getting lined up, and then spiking?
Yeah, I mean, they already spent 5 seconds calling the timeout.
Yeah.
But I mean, I honestly hate clocking it. I think so. This is something I would add to your no huddle offense. You should always have a play for when that happens, and you don't spike it, because spiking because you can't have an illegal formation on. So you have to get set, and you have to line up for a second and be set. You might as well run a 5-second play, honestly,
or even a fake spike.
Yeah, or a fake spike. I mean, like, that's great, right? We've seen a lot of success with that. I think Stafford did a fake spike. I mean,
Stafford is the king of the fake spike, if I remember correctly. Yeah,
he's got like 2, I think both were touchdowns. Marino has a fake spike. That's the most famous one, right?
Yes.
Manning has a fake spike in his like legend resume, right? So you should have a fake spike, but I mean, also you should just have a play, man. So that's my thought. But if not, I think you should spike it because, again, 15 seconds versus 5, but you have the timeout. And that way you're not restricted to just deep shots, which I think was kind of the thinking after that timeout. So in that situation, Dick should have gone out of bounds because it created that problem for them. But I don't blame him too much because I think there were better ways to handle it that the Vikings chose not to. Or at least if you're going to call the timeout, just call it like right away. Sometimes that's not on the coaches, right? Sometimes the ref doesn't see it, but like the ref, I find it hard to believe that in that situation the ref doesn't see it because there's always going to be like a ref right there, and he's going to be waiting for the timeout specifically. But maybe not, right? Either way, the 5 seconds is not as important. The Vikings ended up making that field goal, but I think that it would have been certainly possible for them to score a touchdown, right? I mean, the Bears kept on trying to give the Vikings ways to get back in the game. Like, they should have been up by like 25 at the half, honestly. And they were like conveniently like up by 11 or whatever, right? So, that's really on the Vikings.
Yeah, this was kind of an odd game to be sure, especially in the fourth quarter when it looked where we were just given just enough hope that something positive might actually happen out of this,
right?
And then just like the Saints game, just roll it back, roll back that hope, you're
What's
not
funny
getting
is I
anything
saw
out of
like 3 different points in the fourth quarter that people tweeted out the word dagger. Like, oh, that's the dagger. Okay. Oh, but what about, I thought that was the dag. No, there were like multiple moments that people decided to turn off hope.
The dagger wasn't the pick six? Aww.
Right. Yeah. Right. Well, I mean, I think someone had tweeted a dagger before it. And so if you hadn't seen the pick six yet, but okay, so the pick six happens. That's the end of the game. But then someone else tweeted like after they allowed a third down conversion or something, you're like, that's the dagger. And it's like, well, I admire your optimism.
It felt like the Vikings were never in control of this game. And not just because they never led. It just felt like this game we were manhandled. We were outcoached and outplayed by a superior, stronger team.
Certainly outplayed. I hesitate to say outcoached because I think that schematically the Vikings were mostly ahead, especially on defense. I think that the worst plays they gave up were not problems that were schematic. Like I think on the wing T play, it was just like, well, okay, you lost that round. But I think that a lot of it was execution on defense, or like ad hoc scrambling is not a part of like Matt Nagy's coaching. Like obviously they take into, when they're designing the offense, they take into account Trubisky's athleticism and ability to scramble. But it's not as if Nagy outcoached Zim when Trubisky scrambles. Zim may have outcoached himself, right, by not putting a spy on him or having a contained plan or whatever. But it's not as if, Nagy's playing 4D chess and Zim's playing checkers. It's just like, Zim put his knight in danger without, what's it called, a hanging knight? Yeah. It's kind of like that, right? It's like an unforced error. And so I don't know if I'd call it necessarily outcoaching. I thought the defense, generally speaking, played really well schematically. And then the times that they lost were largely execution errors. Like I said, like Wilson getting to the outside of an outside run and stuff like that. Offensively, that's less the case, but I really do think it was just like, their players are better than yours. And so you need to have a significant coaching advantage. And Vic Fangio is a good defensive coach. He's got great players. So you need to have an enormous coaching advantage for you to be able to outcoach and win by scheme. And I thought the coaching was largely fine. I thought the play calling was okay. Again, there's that criticism of the screen. Again, there's that criticism of having tempo and stuff like that. That are all reasonable, but I think overemphasized and stuff like that. And you have a better plan for Mac, screen to him, run away from him, find ways to tire him out. But for the most part, I thought that the offensive play calling was like fine. I thought that the execution was the bigger problem. The receivers had a phenomenal game. I mean, they were just roasting Prince Mukamara and Kyle Fuller and even Bryce Callahan to some extent, although like they didn't throw to the slot that much when Chad Beebe was there, when Eldrick Robinson was there, or even when Stephon Diggs was in the slot. They just kind of tended to throw to the outside a little bit more. And so Adam Thielen wasn't in the slot all that much in this game, despite him being in the slot, like I think 65% of the time before the game. But, whatever. I mean, they were roasting like some of the best performing cornerbacks of the NFC North and in the league this year. And they couldn't find ways to get the ball to them in great locations or out on time as a result of pressure and stuff like that. So the receivers played well. The running backs, difficult to evaluate. I would say they probably played okay, not spectacularly, but they weren't given a chance by the offensive line. Offensive line obviously got beat up a lot in the run game, and quite a bit, but not quite as much in the passing game. And Cousins didn't really execute.
What happened in the run game exactly? That looked uglier than normal.
Yeah, Akeem Hicks had like 5 tackles and they were all for a loss. Like it was just like disgusting. I mean, he had like an Aaron Donald type day. I think some of it is like not understanding. I don't know. Maybe it's an offensive line scouting thing because they didn't kind of anticipate the kind of things Hicks would do. There's certainly an awareness problem, even though Compton was back in the lineup. When the Bears would stunt or twist, there was like late pickup problems, which I think was responsible for one of the sacks too. But yeah, they just got beat physically. Like, yeah, okay, they got out leveraged at the point of attack and demonstrated poor technique. They also didn't seem to be just as strong, right? Like Khalil Mack is just a bulldozer. Akeem Hicks has, this great technique. He's got a great overarm swim move that, the guards and Pat Elflein as well didn't do as well with. But, I thought for the most part, it seemed like Mike Remmers and Tom Compton were primarily the issue, but it's not like Pat Elflein played well either. So, I mean, it was just like poor run blocking, which I know sounds like really deep analysis. Like, what happened in the running game? Well, they didn't block. But sometimes the issues kind of just do fall down to something that fundamental. Sometimes it was technique issues, not anticipating the swim moves, not knowing how to deal with a long arm. Sometimes it was strength issues. You're just not as strong as Akeem Hicks. And sometimes, it's maybe a coaching point, like watch out for this or watch out for that. But it was like a combination of all of these factors that played a really big role in the Vikings not being able to run the ball.
It was just odd to see because we've had success over the last couple of weeks. Ignoring the fact we had a bye the week before, like this has been a team that has all of a sudden been able to move the ball on the ground, and all of a sudden any sort of holes that we might have had access to swallowed up before they'd even developed, and our guy was being tackled behind the line. So it was just, of all the things that I was expecting Kirk Cousins to get hit. I was expecting Kirk Cousins to do something stupid, usually an overthrow. And I was expecting us to be able to do something in the run game, maybe more than 20 yards.
Yeah, it was what ended up being 22 or something like that. Yeah, fair.
It actually got to the point where I was wondering, like, what exactly did Dalvin Cook do to deserve this day? Like, what was it last? Was it the last game when he broke off like 70 or 80? Like, okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I couldn't tell you kind of what karmic retribution is being wrought upon Dalvin Cook. I think
that's the analysis that people would be giving extra money on patreon.com/norsecode.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
You should be able to provide that sort of thing. What karmic justice are we having?
That's a failure on my part. What karmic sin did Dalvin Cook commit? Can we correct it outside of the football field?
Is it coachable?
I would say that, the running game obviously has looked a lot better in the past couple of weeks. It felt like it was on its way for us to be able to say it was resolved, and then it had this kind of night. Obviously they didn't allow a tackle for loss last week. That's nice. Obviously they didn't run the ball last week. It was a bye, but good streak to get going.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think it felt like kind of no matter what they were doing in the run game, the Bears kind of had an answer for it. And maybe you could say that that's a form of outcoaching.
Yeah, possible. I suppose Dan Bailey is worth talking about for just a moment, and hopefully this will be the last thing we mention of him. Dan Bailey kicked the ball, and it went through the uprights repeatedly.
Yeah, I was going to tweet again that Dan Bailey didn't miss a kick, but I felt like maybe that wasn't... that would be about as well received as it was last time, which was not very well at all. I'm waiting for your New Year's resolution in January of being, okay, I've gotten into all the Twitter fights I care to. Let's dial it back this year just a little bit. I've gotten into a Twitter fight after I think every game, sometimes not even about the game. Like this last week, it was about the playoff odds that the New York Times Upshot vertical provides, and whether or not statistics are made up or real or whatever, which I want to clarify. Just because I think all statistics are made up does not mean I don't think that they're real. They're obviously real. It's just a question of kind of how we come to categorize and label data. Come on, man. All stats are made up. We choose to assign value to yards and whatever. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Is this where we get into a discussion of what time is and whether time exists?
I was in a debate round that I was judging just 2 weeks ago where that discussion showed up. And they went over time intentionally in their speech time. And I was like, oh, that's cute. That's clever. But in my judge philosophy, so you post your judge philosophies online so people can kind of adapt to who you are as a judge. In my judge philosophy, I even say I actually do not have a rule about speech times. I do have a rule about the total time of the round. So if you exceed that, I'm just going to cut you off. And the other debater just stuck to the speech times because he was like, this is absurd. We should respect the reality of time itself. This is insane.
Respecting the reality of time itself.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to this claim. I'll say that. And so he stuck to the speech times. The other one didn't. So he kept on going over the speech times. And inevitably, if one person sticks to the speech times and the other one goes over, we'll reach the end of the round. And so I just cut them off and they lost the round because, their final arguments didn't count, right? Because they went over time. Anyway.
their final arguments happened in a time that did not exist.
Yeah, exactly. It occurred in a time vacuum, if you will.
In the before time, in the long, long ago.
Right. The time after time, and then also because of that, before time.
Yeah. Cyndi Lauper has a lot of things to say about that. Let's see if we can get back to the game for just a moment.
I wanted to talk about the fact that I get into fights after every game. And this time It was about how we craft objectivity as a concept over all of our subjectivity, ignoring that we always complain about how subjective football is, like what a catch is, how many yards, what's the spot, right? That's all subjective, but we're like, yeah, this data is all objective. Anyway, that was a conversation about playoff probabilities. The Vikings still have an above 50% chance of making the playoffs, which I think people have not. I'm not going to say they don't realize it, but I think they've not internalized it because the way they talk about the team, it's like a lost cause. This team is, not good or whatever, which maybe that's true, but that the rest of the NFC is also like not good. So they might still make the playoffs, and it seems like their odds are better than even.
So you're saying that this fella disagreed with this?
Well, he thought it was like made up. Like he was like, that's a made up stat. And I'm like, well, it's not really a stat. So that was why I said all stats are made up, because they are. But like, also, this isn't really like a stat. It's just like a projection based off of their model, which is based off of ELO, which is based off of statistics. So it's not a stat. It's a projection. You don't like have to believe it, but there's like a methodological explanation. It's not like fake. And he's like, well, it's fake. And I'm like, well, I mean, fine, but so is everything else. So I don't know how you're dealing with that reality. But it's like it's pretty reasonable, and it gives us the ability to kind of model outcomes in a world where we try to figure out kind of what the playoff math is, which I'm sure we have a question or 8 about them. But I do want to say it is important to note that if the Vikings beat the Packers and the Seahawks, regardless of what happens in the game in between, which is the Patriots one, they have like an 80% chance of making the playoffs. And that's because the NFC South teams that are in wild card contention both lost this last weekend. Well, I shouldn't say. I mean, the Falcons aren't really. So the Panthers lost, right? And then the rest of your like wild card teams are, I guess, the Seahawks, which they'll probably get the 5, right? Or the NFC East, which, let's be honest, the division winner might have like a 7-9 record. So, yeah, the Vikings have a really good shot of like backing into the playoffs. And we've seen mediocre teams, both in the NFC, Giants, and in the AFC, Ravens, make an insane playoff run. And I think this team certainly has the capability to do that because they have the players with the talent level to do that. So, yeah, if they've got a chance to make the playoffs, they've got a chance to win a Super Bowl, whatever.
Well, let's get back to the game for just a moment. Is there anything else we can glean from this loss kind of moving forward? And it's not that God hates the Vikings.
I mean, there's probably, yeah, right. There's probably like a lot of individual small things, like Anthony Barr does, in fact, help the defense. And that the Vikings should probably approach mobile quarterbacks in a much different way than they have in the past. But largely not really. Like, we knew that if the offense were to struggle, this would be how they struggle, right? It would be because they've allowed pressure, because of miscommunication. It's not because the receivers are playing poorly. They're playing really well. They can play against the best cornerbacks in the league. And we knew that the run game was a concern despite how well they've done going in. So it's not new information. There's not a ton of new information. It's confirmation of stuff we already kind of knew.
Well, let's talk about playoff stuff then. Let's talk about the playoff path. And as you mentioned, because the Lions beat the Carolina Panthers, that significantly helped us. So what are we looking at as far as the path to the playoffs at this point?
Yeah, so I've got like the Upshot simulator up, and honestly, what happens is the Patriots game. I'm not going to say it doesn't matter because every win helps, but it matters a lot less than every other game because you either have your divisional opponents, right, or you've got teams that are competing for those wildcard spots, like the Seahawks. So the path to the playoffs is very likely, unless the Bears crap the bed, which, hey, that's certainly possible. Because I think that there's a turnover regression waiting to happen for them, and that offense is not good. And it showed that last night. So, or whenever you listen to this, right? So yeah, the path to the playoffs is, I mean, it's really just if you win those two games, you've got just this incredible chance of like an 80% chance. So in a world where, say, the Bears lose to the Lions or whatever, which, I mean, that doesn't seem super likely, but say it's possible that the Bears lose to the Lions, and then they also lose to the Giants. Again, doesn't seem possible because those two teams blow. The Vikings have an opportunity to be a division champion. They've got like a 33% chance just to being the division, or a 35% chance just to being the division champion, plus another 15% chance of making the playoffs. And that's just off of Bears losses. This has nothing to do with whether or not the Vikings win, right? So they've got about a 50% chance of making the playoffs just off of that, if the Bears lose their two next games. So that's one playoff path. But really, it's mostly because the only other wild card contender is the Seahawks. So if they beat, if the Vikings beat their NFC opponents, so if the Vikings beat the Packers, the Seahawks, and the Lions before the Bears game, they've got a 96% chance of making the playoffs. Now, obviously, if they beat the Bears, they've got a 100% chance of making the playoffs. If they beat all of their NFC opponents, they win. But if they beat three of those NFC opponents, they've got a 96% chance of making the playoffs. If they happen to lose those AFC games, obviously those count as losses. That changes the record. That affects the wildcard seedings. But it drops from 96% to 85%. It's 10% is a lot, but like in the scheme of those extremes, it's not as impactful. And so there could be a lot of situations where that Bears game just kind of doesn't matter. Now, obviously, if the Vikings had beaten the Bears, that Bears game at the very end would matter a lot. Now, kind of regardless, if the Vikings do beat the Bears at home, no matter what happens in the rest of the season, or not no matter what happens, knowing that the rest of the season is kind of an unknown. Say we know for a fact they win against the Bears in Week 17, they make the playoffs 62% of the time. So there's a lot of opportunities for the Vikings to make it into the playoffs that we don't need to know the outcomes of the other games. But I think primarily you've got these 3 weeks coming up. You've got two NFC opponents that are competing directly with you for the wild card spots. And those will constitute the bulk of the Vikings' chances. So those two games, the Vikings' chances of making the playoffs, if they win those two games, their odds rise to 87%. If they lose against the Patriots, that drops to 80%, right? If they lose against the Dolphins, that drops to, it looks like 62%. So it's those two games that I think will, and if they lose one of those two games, say they lose to the Packers and beat the Seahawks, they're back down to below 50%. If they beat the Packers and lose to the Seahawks, they're back at what it looks like 54%. So those two games and winning, obviously those two back up above 80. So those two games I think are critical for the Vikings.
What would you say to someone who would, let's say, just come up to you on Twitter? I was going to say come up to you on the street, but let's be honest, most of your arguments
happen too.
Well,
but
yes,
yeah, let's Twitter. Yeah,
let's just say for the sake of argument that somebody disagrees with you on Twitter. I know, I'm shocked too.
Yeah, you're crazy. Yeah.
If someone goes up to you and says, "Hey, the Vikings have no business being in the playoffs because they can't seem to beat a team that has a winning record or is any good," is there any sort of response to that?
Well, I mean, obviously you have to like finish, but it should be noted that your record in close games, which is what technically all three of these are, well, I guess the Saints one isn't No, what was the final point? Because it doesn't feel like a close game. I'm going to take a look at what the final score in that game was. Because there's
it was 30-20.
Okay, yeah, so that doesn't count as a close game. So 2 of those games are close, right? And they're 0-2 in those 2 games. That doesn't tell us very much, kind of going forward, how they'll perform in the future. In the same scenario, close game records tend not to repeat themselves. I think like one of the only exceptions is the Peyton Manning Colts, where they just tended to have an outsized record year after year in close games. But basically every other team has not matched their close game record going forward, either halfway through the season or one season to the next. It's kind of one of the biggest edges you can have in gambling, is to throw out close game records and only look at records in games that was like 8 points or more or something like that. So I would say it probably doesn't indicate in the future that they won't be able to beat them, especially because, 2 of those games are on the road. And that could like flip it 6 points in the other direction. But yeah, it's fair, but it is not compelling to me. So I don't think I'd be able to convince them, right? Like, oh, hey, kind of going forward, historically, this doesn't matter. It's not a compelling argument, even if it's true. I think for a lot of people, it's not very persuasive. But to me, it would be kind of compelling to say, hey, largely we have evidence that indicates that the team has performed well for large stretches. And you can say, hey, the Bears game didn't feel close. They just kind of backdoored themselves into a close game as opposed to, arriving there. But I mean, like, take the pick 6 away, right? Which, I mean, that happened to the game, but it's like one play, right? Take one high impact, low frequency event out of the game. And like the Vikings, and obviously they would play the final drives differently, but the total points are in the Vikings' favor. They end up winning, right? So, yeah, I would say that the Vikings have shown that they can be competitive in those games, and if you're competitive in those games, you can win.
So that's what you get to say on Twitter, and that's what you get to say in bars whenever anyone questions why you're still watching this horrible purple team.
Yeah, that's an argument that works well in bars.
Yes. And anytime you tell anybody to, calm down always works too. So this is good. I feel like we're being productive today. Let's roll right along. The next thing I want to mention is talking about the game against the Packers. We will be playing them for the first time since week 2, I believe, when we sadly tied them. Although now Daniel Carlson just hits game-winning kicks, so good for him.
Good for him. Good for him. Bless his heart.
Bless his heart. The only question I have about the Packers game, we know what to expect and everything, but what has changed since week 2 as far as the Packers are concerned?
Well, Aaron Jones is back, and that's pretty significant. I think that, a running game that is more than kind of like an afterthought always kind of helps the Packers. Remember how everyone thought they would be super dangerous. That one year Eddie Lacy was good. Kind of the same thing, right? Where with Aaron Jones, you've got, I think, a more capable running game. But for the most part, I don't think a ton. I mean, Aaron Rodgers is more mobile. He can clean up his mechanics a lot more, and he looks a lot more like his like previous self. I don't know if there are like people listening to this that are super tuned into kind of the feeling that Packers fans have or Packers Twitter has. But there are people who hold significant weight in Packers Twitter, or just a large vocal, maybe minority, maybe a majority of people who think that Aaron Rodgers is the problem. So there's like this like breakdown, right? People don't know whether or not to blame McCarthy, although most of them do. People don't know whether or not to blame Aaron Rodgers, although apparently at least some of them do, or kind of just what's happening and what the problem is. And a lot of that just has to do with the fact that he's just not playing as well as he used to, right? Like everyone talks about that missed 3rd and 2, which is like kind of baffling. But also like they're like ignoring like, oh, he made two 50-yard touchdown throws that like no one else in the league can make. And that's not like an exact, like I can't, maybe Cam, right, can make those, but I don't think Stafford can, given kind of the especially the one to the tight end whose name I can't remember, tight end 4. But like it's like Robert something. But like, I don't think Stafford can make that. Maybe Mahomes could make it. We're watching him make some of these throws right now, I guess. We're recording this during Monday Night Football. But like, for the most part, it's like kind of just Rodgers. And he instantly puts like 14 points up on the board, and we're like really upset that he won't make the 3rd and 2. Like, that's important, but it just means he's not playing as well as he used to. And there could be any variety of reasons for that. It could be, just increasingly poor play calling from McCarthy, an offensive line that's no longer as good as it was, even though David Bakhtiari is quite good. That probably plays a role. Obviously, the receiving corps is not as talented as it used to be, but everyone's like really excited about, Geronimo Allison, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, not to mention kind of Davante Adams kind of finally emerging. But, it's no prime Jordy, prime Cobb, I guess prime Jennings. I don't know. But, there's any number of reasons that it's not performing as well. But, he is also just like not performing as well. So that's kind of changed, that people kind of recognize that though he's healthy, though he can kind of do the amazing things, he's not as consistent, which is kind of what made him good, because he could do crazy things, but he could also be consistent. The defense is performing well, but it's not enough. So those are the things. Like, I think the last time when we previewed the Packers in week 2, when we talked to Michelle, we talked about a lot of the potential that the defense had and a lot of the kinds of things that a defensive coordinator like Mike Pettin could do. But we didn't talk about it in terms of these are the things that he's done. And I think that in a lot of circumstances, they have done those things. Kenny Clark looks even better than we thought he would. Going into the season, and he's actually like number 2 in some IDP leagues. Like, it's crazy. He's a nose tackle. He's getting sacks. But yeah, not a ton has changed. It's just they've actualized a lot of things.
The team is becoming self-actualized.
Kill it.
It's what is fun to watch as a Vikings fan is watching Green Bay begin to eat itself. Especially in the discussion over Mike McCarthy and the crazy people who seem to think that Aaron Rodgers is in fact the problem. So it is fun to watch people actually like take out the pitchforks for McCarthy, although he seems to survive every year. So why is it this year that people are all of a sudden pointing at him going, maybe he really is the problem?
Well, I think so. I think from the perspective of Packers fans, they've been talking about this for a while. The question is kind of what it is, kind of when it boils over. And
it feels like this is the year it's turned into a full roar.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so when does it translate from, a small number of fans to a large number of fans to like a situation the league knows about, or people that have the ability to, their board of directors that are elected but not elected by their shareholders, when they have an opportunity to have a discussion about Mike McCarthy. And I think we are at that point that he's on the hot seat. But I think the past couple of years, we've had convenient excuses, right? Like, oh, well, you can't expect like Deshaun Kaiser or was it Brett Hundley to organize the season, even though he was like your 2nd round pick. It's your scouting department. But you can't expect him to like do what Aaron Rodgers did, which I guess fair. Or, hey, we got rid of the defensive coordinator, Dom Capers, and so that gives us a kind of another year of lead time on the head coach, right? Because maybe you fixed the biggest problem, and maybe you didn't. Or maybe you did, and that's not enough, rather. We got rid of Ted Thompson. Time to see what McCarthy can do with a general manager who's kind of more aware of in tune of things, right? So they've constantly made changes that could, or have had setbacks that could provide you with some level of shielding or patience for McCarthy. So even though you could identify all these problems with McCarthy, his relationship with Rodgers, his play calling, his management, you could always point to another problem with the Packers. This is such a weird thing to say. I mean, this has been such a successful franchise for so long that we're like, yeah, all these problems the Packers have had, they've only made the playoffs like half of the year. So okay. But, relative to their expectations, all the problems that they've had, and they've found ways to resolve those problems, and it's finally kind of getting to be the head coach.
One of those like all the other problems or all the other potential solutions have been tried. we might actually, and the only person that's left is the one guy holding the envelope. Like, it might be his fault.
Right, yeah.
It's entirely possible that this could all be Mike McCarthy's fault. Do we line up any differently, or do we match up any differently as far as the Vikings are concerned?
I mean, so when you have a more kind of mature receiving core out of like the preponderance of rookies and sophomores that they've had, you have to approach it differently. Like Marquez Valdes-Scantling is out there. You probably want Trey Waynes on him. So that's kind of a different approach to the matchup. I think that given Aaron Jones's kind of performance in the run game, you're going to want, people like Linval and Sheldon Richardson to kind of be more aware of reading the run before they try and get to the quarterback. But for the most part, I think, put Rhodes on Adams, put J-Ron on Jimmy, I guess, and kind of let the rest sort itself out. It's going to be good that Barr said today that he might be healthy enough to play or he said he will be healthy enough to play for the Packers, which to me means might be healthy enough to play against the Packers. And so that's good because, like I've mentioned, Eric Wilson has struggled a lot in the run game, like enormously in the run. Like his performance against the run game is like bottom 5. It's abysmal. His performance in coverage is like really fantastic. He got exploited once in coverage in this past week, but I mean, he's just kind of an elite coverage linebacker and just this awful run stopping line. It's pretty interesting. But you'll have Anthony Barr back, so you'll have the ability to maybe drop off a little bit in coverage. A little bit. And then upgrade pretty massively in run blocking. And then despite the fact that Wilson has a sack and Barr does not this season, Barr is a better pass rusher. So you get that element too. But yeah, I think other than that, there's not really many matchups that I think change. Everyone kind of knew about Kenny Clark going in. They knew about, hey, maybe Nick Perry is not so great, and so on. So yeah, I mean, you have to watch out for like a more mature defensive back group. But I mean, they've been playing really well for a while. I would still put Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs up against like Jair Alexander, who's playing better than like Rhodes and Waynes are. But I mean, Diggs and Thielen are just really good. So yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about the receiver versus cornerback group.
How's Davante Adams going to do against us? Is he going to torch us for 6 touchdowns like I think he's going to?
Well, I mean, to justify the growing sentiment among Packers fans that, he's actually a top 5 receiver and that he's better than Diggs and Thielen. And
oh God, like
DeAndre, have you seen this? Like Packers Twitter is like so in Davante Adams is like, and it might just be kind of like this like reaction, right? Because they were so down on it. I was super down on him too, but they were so down on him in his first 2 years, especially because he like dropped like 20 passes.
When did this change? Like, when did all of a sudden
when he became an elite receiver?
Oh,
James,
yeah, when he became an elite receiver
in the NFL.
Yeah, I'm sure. I've watched him multiple games for the last couple of years. He's getting
He's better
targets.
than DeAndre Hopkins. He's better than Adam Thielen. He's better than Stephon Diggs.
To his credit, he seems to be dropping the ball less, which seemed to be his biggest problem for the last couple of years.
It was a pretty big problem.
Like, it was predictable. It was like
he scored more touchdowns than Julio.
Oh, jeez.
I think he might have more receptions than Antonio. I mean, name a receiver better than Davante Adams. You can't. You can't do it.
Jordy Nelson?
Well, I mean, he's planning on retiring. But when he retires...
Aldrick Robinson?
Right, you can't beat that touchdown, right? That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
It's really hard to do that. All right, let's move on because we're just going to start going down a terrible road here that neither of us wants to go down.
Right. Name one thing Odell Beckham does better than Davante Adams. I dare you.
Cocaine?
Okay, well, that's not proof.
That's not provable.
Yeah, there's just video. It's a white substance. We don't know what it is. Could be sugar.
Yeah, that's what a lot of NFL players do on their off time in Miami is snort sugar.
Yeah.
Makes total sense.
I mean, they meet up with the former offensive line coach. They bake cookies.
Yeah. My apologies. I apparently was being quite facetious. let's go to the mailbag here. We are going to start getting into the Thanksgiving portion of the program here, but first, a couple of Vikings questions. First off, from Raul, who says, last week we discussed the stability of turnover rates by defenses. How stable are the turnover rates for offenses and quarterbacks, specifically Kirk Cousins? He has had one game without a fumble or an interception this year.
Rough. I hadn't thought about it like that until I saw that question in our inbox. I was like, oh, goodness. More stable from what I remember, but still not extraordinarily stable. But I mean, if you've got a quarterback that's throwing a lot of interceptions, he's likely to throw more interceptions. If you've got a quarterback that's leading the league in interception rate halfway through the season, he will continue to throw interceptions at a higher rate than the rest of the NFL and closer to his league leading rate than a defense that's leading the league in interceptions, which is maybe one reason that offenses are more determinative of outcomes than defenses are, because they've got more control over turnovers. He's probably not going to be leading the league in interception rate by year's end, but it is more likely that his second half performance will mirror his first half than defensively. So it is more stable, but it's still not extraordinarily stable. Now, I don't know if that's completely the case for fumbles, but I mean, if you take a look at who's been leading the league in fumbles over the past couple of years, they have fumbled this year a lot. So I guess for quarterbacks that might be a thing to watch out for. And it just so happens that Cousins is one of those guys, which we asked what the over-under on quarterback fumbles in the game would be, and Lauren said 3. So I said 3.5, and he took the under at 3. And that was not the case. It was just like 4 interceptions instead.
Yeah, a bit of an odd. God, and a couple of those just seemed like gifts. Like Trubisky was just being generous with the whole, I've been good for too long this game.
Right, yeah.
I wasn't very good last year. I need to just regress for just a moment. Here, you had fun with it the first time. Have a second.
Yeah, right. Just be sure to give it back in, about a minute.
Oh. I wasn't feeling good last night when I was watching the game, which just made it all the better. So I'm curled up under a blanket and just like, there's only so much anger one can express while you have like a quilt over you. Like it's just right. There's only so much anger. So because you're being covered by a heavy quilt. And if your arms are underneath the quilt anyway, like I talk with my hands, I admit that. And if I'm angry at the game, I'm going to make gigantic hand like motions or whatever. So like I wasn't feeling good enough. I wasn't feeling good already, but I'm watching the game and like I'm trying to be mad and like I have to get my hands out from under here to like express my concern for how dumb that pass was. Just don't like people. Let's go to the next question. Let's just go to the next one. Kyle Slaby asks, can Arif start pointing out how horrible Kirk secretly is? We could use some of that Wentz or Trubisky reverse magic right about now.
So I want to say that for 2 out of 3 seasons, I've been technically correct about Wentz. It just so happens that the other season was an MVP caliber season. Okay. Second, Trubisky's still not good, man. I'm still right about this. I'm going to hold on to it. You just threw 2 interceptions. Come on.
Were either of them throwing left?
They were both in the middle of the field. They weren't quite. But he did have struggles throwing left. He had 4.1 yards per attempt throwing past the line of scrimmage to the left against the Vikings versus, I think, 6 yards per attempt to the middle and to the right. Yes, I did look that up after the game. I know there's something wrong with me.
I had to do my due diligence. I had to
that's
ask.
fair. That's fair. But I couldn't tweet out the stat because both interceptions were left-ish, but in the middle. They were between the numbers.
Centrist.
Yeah. Trubisky. Centrist.
Let's talk about Wentz for a moment, just because we have an opportunity. Arif, you have the floor. Carson Wentz looked terrible. I believe the line from Pro Football Talk this morning was about how he needs to stop chasing throws. I was tired this morning and read that as chasing waterfalls.
I mean, you just don't go doing it.
You don't go chasing waterfalls. You should always stick to the rivers and the lakes that you're used to. Arif, you have the floor. Carson Wentz looks rough.
Yeah, he looks rough. His knee is healthy. That has nothing to do with it. He's as mobile as ever. He can take as many hits as he did before, which is 0 because he gets injured all the time. He has not been healthy for a playoff run in his career. That's not true, but I'm going to say it is. That includes, of course, his college career, where Easton Stick led them to a national title. Easton Stick, who's going to be drafted in the 4th round, despite being the one who gave them the ring. Oh, well. Carson Wentz has started inviting sacks again, and unfortunately, he has not maintained his stellar presence against pressure, has been throwing picks, has allowed sacks. This is despite an offensive line that people think is universally very good, whether or not Big V is playing, and he can't mitigate pressure with throws. He's supposed to be Peyton Manning pre-snap, but unfortunately, he is 2018 Peyton Manning post-snap. It's not happening, man. Carson Wentz is bad. I was right. He is just a really big running back. I'm done.
Are you sure you're done? I feel like you got a little bit more in you.
I got to save it for when I actually watch the tape. I just said those things.
I did watch a good chunk of that game, and I was flustered for you at that moment.
Well, okay, so the chasing throws thing is kind of true, and he is staring people down and stuff like that. But it just feels like he's also not sure of what he's seeing, right? Which you could also be interpreted as chasing throws.
A quarterback with confidence issues is not a quarterback you necessarily want to have behind the line.
Right. Yeah. So I'm sure once someone tweeted at me that he's 1 in 12 in games where the defense is allowed over 25 points. And I was like, that's an amazing statistic. I won't tweet that out. I guess I'll say it on a podcast. But because, the reason is probably because the majority of those games occurred his rookie year, right? Because, in his second year, the defense was stellar. So there's probably not that many games where they allowed more than 25 points. So it's not as if good Carson Wentz foils or, he collapses under the pressure of having to score points, right? So, it's probably not the case. It's probably a rookie year thing. But I enjoyed seeing it nevertheless. So whoever sent it to me, thanks. I think it was Behind Skull. So, thanks for sending me that, Brian.
Good. I'm glad we were able to cover that because otherwise I'm sure you would have just frothed at the mouth after this.
Right, reminder, I am decidedly unfair about Carson Wentz because I hate NDSU and then also Carson Wentz. So, take that all with a boulder of salt.
And when it comes to the playoffs for college football for Division I or whatever it is they're calling the division that NDSU owns, I cheer for NDSU. But that's because UND has a quasi-football team, but it's not very good. And NDSU is halfway decent.
Go Jackrabbits. Go Dukes. According to Reddit College Football, the SDSU Jackrabbits are the closest geographically FCS playoff team to Hennepin County, where I reside. So I am a homegrown SDSU Jackrabbits fan, big fan of Dallas Goedert and Jake Weineke, and I think Zach Zenner is an alum as well. I don't know who currently plays for the Jackrabbits, but I assure you I'm big fans of them. And also my James Madison Dukes, the most recent legitimate FCS champions.
Legitimate, huh?
They don't commit recruiting violations. There's no evidence that NDSU does either.
There's no evidence at all. Although
there's not even. I don't think anyone's lobbied an accusation. But they are not cowards. NDSU, you're cowards for not joining the Big Ten.
At this point, it's entirely possible. The fun thing is that the coach for NDSU is being courted by other teams, as was the last one. So who knows what'll end up happening for them. But this is not an NDSU podcast. This is a Minnesota Vikings podcast. So Kyle Slaby asks, how much would John Gruden give us for Kirk? It's about time we exact our revenge on him.
For giving the Bears Klumac.
Yes.
I think they've got a couple of firsts, right? So I could see. He loved Kirk, At least in the broadcast booth. Who knows what he actually thinks?
It'd be a situation where like he tries to trade Kirk Cousins, or not Kirk Cousins, where he tries to trade like Derek Carr and like 2 of the firsts that he's acquired over the past month.
Right. Yeah. Which it'd be hilarious to watch Vikings fans like contort themselves into liking Derek Carr.
Oh God.
Right. Yeah. That's great for Vikings Twitter too, actually, I think. But which, by the way, I was like a Derek Carr believer until his rookie year. And then I was like, crap, he's fake stats. He's not actually good. And everyone's like, but he's the best rookie quarterback. I mean, look at his touchdown interception ratio. And I was like, look at Mike Glennon's touchdown interception ratio his rookie year. He was also fantastic. Yards per attempt matters. It's determinative. And then Derek Carr had a good second year. And everyone's like, well, he's actually good now. And I was like, well, okay, at least I had him ranked second among my 2014 quarterbacks, so I can take the win anyway. And then he was bad after that. So I thought, given how that happened, that the same thing would happen to Jared Goff. It didn't, but it did happen to Carson Wentz. So, yards per attempt matters, kids.
Small victories. Slaby also asks, what is your most controversial Thanksgiving dish, i.e. the one item that you must have that traditionalists will hate?
It's less about the ones that I want to have or must have, and it's the ones that I must not have. And he knows this, which I think is why he asked this question. But I can't think of like a must-have Thanksgiving dish that has like caused controversy among the people who care about Thanksgiving. I do think that we should do alternate versions of sweet potatoes, and that sweet potatoes are a must-have, but like the sweet potato marshmallow disaster that people put out is not.
Yes.
So, baked sweet, I mean, you could have savory sweet potatoes. It doesn't have to be sweet potatoes, but you could have, sweet potato dessert. Sweet potato pie is pretty good. But I also like pumpkin pie, so I don't necessarily want to replace it. But yeah, I don't have a must have that I think is very controversial.
There has been controversy in my home.
Okay. What's your controversial dish?
There has been arguments. There has been literally pie was brought to me the other day, and then I was told I was not allowed to desecrate it.
What do you do to these poor pies, James?
I put cheese on a apple pie.
Oh my God, that's very Vermont of you. Oh wow!
And apparently, this is something that is frowned upon in this establishment. So.
It's frowned upon in almost every. That's weird. I've never had it, but there's enough people that stand for it that I'm curious. So I'm not going to knock it. But I will tell you, yeah, no shit, people are angry, man. Put cheese on a pie.
And I like an apple pie, like a good, like a warmer temperature as a result of putting the little bit of cheese on it. It is not the worst tasting thing in the world. It is not desecration of a pie. However, it has caused a bit of a tiff in the house.
A tiff.
Yes. To the point of actually having a pie brought to me yesterday, because we bought our Thanksgiving pie yesterday, and I was told specifically I was not allowed to desecrate it. So I'm just guessing Thursday night, when everyone else is sleeping, I'm going to I'm going to like microwave the pie just a little bit, put a piece of cheese on it, and just like eat it in the dark, so no one else can see it.
I like that as much as you won't admit that it's wrong, you like realize that it's shameful. So you're acting guilty.
I'm gonna play like This Mortal Coil or some awful like metal band, just sadness. I'm gonna listen to the Smiths and like for the first time get it while I'm eating this. While I'm eating this pie with cheese
Morrissey
on it.
Really speaks to me.
Oh, God. Meat is murder, Morrissey. Meat is murder. Next question. Kenneth Allen asks, how well did Anthony Harris play? Were those 2 picks great plays or Trubisky gifts? And could he continue to start after Sendejo heals up?
So I do think that there's some element to that second interception that was a bit of a gift. More than a bit of a gift. But I mean, that first interception was like all him, right? He anticipated the route early. He collapsed in on it. And he did just a phenomenal job at the catch point in order to get it, like a stunning job at the catch point. So that's definitely not a gift, that first interception. And I think Zimmer even singled it out. He's like, well, I don't know how Anthony Harris played, but that first interception was like all him. So, good for him. The way that like Zimmer compliments players. But I think that for the most part, he did play well aside from that. Kind of when running plays were getting kind of out of hand, like Eric Hendricks was like being dragged or whatever, he was able to stuff the run. There's a moment where he like laid the wood down on a running back. And I was like, why is Trey Waynes the only dude who can tackle? And it was Anthony Harris, who, of course, is bigger than Trey Waynes, but has dreadlocks and is a defensive back. So I'm easily confused. But, he played really well. I don't think it's just the 2 interceptions, nor do I think it's because one of the interceptions might have been a gift.
All right, next question is also from Kenneth Allen, who asks, Zimmer claimed that part of the problem with the offense was not being able to set up the run. Does Arif agree, given his analytics light perspective on rushing, or does he think something else is primarily responsible for?
So when he says setting up the run, I don't know if he means like passes set up the run or just establishing the run. I'm sympathetic to it, right? Because So here's the thing. So we know that on 3rd and long, pass rushing is more effective. On passing plays, on 1st and 2nd down, or 3rd and medium, 3rd and short, on those passing plays, interception rates are half that of, or not interception rates, sack rates are half that of 3rd and long, because the defense knows that you're going to pass the ball, and so they do get to pin their ears back. And in situations where we know it's a passing situation, sack rates go up. And so there is definitely a demonstrable evidence that 3rd and long increases pressure. So aside from that, what can you do to prevent 3rd and long? If you run the ball, you got to run it well, obviously. If you don't run the ball well, you have to, obviously you have to throw it. And 2 incompletions, which, 2 incompletions in a row is honestly not that likely, I guess, because, you got like a 70% completion rate in the NFL, generally speaking. So it's like a 10% essentially likelihood of 2 incompletions in a row. But it's probably more likely of a second incompletion given the first, because you're in 2nd and long. So people probably know you're going to throw the ball, or you're more likely to throw the ball. So all of that aside, I think that you should probably still be passing the ball if you're not good at running, and just kind of absorb it. And you should also know that play action just works kind of regardless, except in situations where it is situationally impossible for you to run, like in the 2-minute drill. So I think some of that is just kind of a relic of the way that we think about running the ball. But some of it, I think makes sense, right? Because if you think that 3rd and long is more likely in situations where you can't establish the run, then you're going to think that your passing game can't get going. I think that there's some truth to it, but I think that the truth of it does matter. If you're running the ball at 1.6 yards per attempt, it is unlikely that you'll do a very good job of passing the ball. And I know Washington State or somebody had a game this year where they had 0 rushing yards and won the game. But but I think in an NFL game, if you refuse to run the ball, at some point the game theory aspect of it will just kind of tip over, and you'll be in a bad situation. To some extent, running the ball is important, and being unable to set up the run or unable to run the ball hurts you pretty significantly, but I don't think it's ever as serious as how coaches say it, which, it's my answer was basically in your question, your analytics light approach to running the ball. I just split the middle. I just said running matters, but not as much as coaches think, which is the same thing I said in 80 podcasts. So sorry for boring you guys.
There you go. Also, thoughts on takeout Indian food for Thanksgiving, a la takeout Chinese for Jewish Christmas. I'm for this idea, strangely.
Objectively, good idea. Subjectively, for me, not a great idea. I have a strange relationship with Indian food. Has to do with the fact that I ate basically nothing but Indian food for 17 years of my life at home, and I don't like it for the most part. But if I can remove those associations, or I go a long time without Indian food, I really enjoy it a lot. So, great idea. Love it.
I'm still disturbed that I had the worst Indian food of my life in New York. Just the absolute worst Indian food of my life.
What are the odds, man? That's crazy.
And then I went next door to get a slice of pizza. I was like, I have to remove this. And it was a terrible slice of pizza. I was like, this is just a bad neighborhood for food, apparently.
The worst New York experience ever.
They were both next door to each other, too. I was like, this neighborhood could like be wiped off the planet, and I would be totally fine with that.
The Indian street food we had right next to that crepe place is pretty good, though.
Yeah, you eat past the questionable pink stuff, and it was great. Like, it was.
That's fair. I did not get sick, so I approve.
Yes, as long as you don't get sick, it was totally fine.
Serious concern, though.
There was a moment there. You're like, huh? You had showed me too, and it's like, you're like, do I keep eating? It's like, I feel like you have to at this point. You're pot committed.
Yeah, right.
The damage is already done, Arif. Like, there's only so much you can like handle. There's only so much that Pepto is going to be able to do. That can be done
here. At this point. Yeah. Well, I think if a microbiologist wrote into the show, they would talk to us about like critical capacities or whatever it's called.
Nonsense.
But, for the most part, I've already had the poison. Might as well have more. Dosage doesn't matter, right?
Buy the ticket, take the ride. Like that's exactly what ended up happening there.
There you go.
I'd be totally fine with like a butter chicken or something. What if you were able to like combine the two like partially? Be like, okay, well, we're gonna do like a butter chicken, or even like do like a tikka masala, but actually add turkey to that. That could be kind of interesting.
I mean, you could do it. It wouldn't be as good. So.
Are you just saying that because the bird is not...
It's an inferior bird.
Okay. I'm trying to dress up something that you don't like at all. The game drove me to eat leftover turkey last night in a sandwich.
Okay, so again, to clarify my stance, that turkey is a trash meat. Okay, so that's my stance, right? We'll start from there. My stance is not that turkey can never taste good. I've had really good tasting turkey. My stance is instead that any situation where a turkey tastes good, an alternative meat would taste better. Plus, turkey has higher odds, a higher probability of tasting bad because of how dry it gets, because of how it has a little bit less flavor just inherently. It tends not to taste as good, and the treatments that make it taste good work better for other meats. So buttered turkey instead of buttered chicken, I bet that tastes good, and I bet it probably avoids the dryness problems that you typically get with turkey. But I bet it tastes better with chicken, and you don't have to like be as finicky about it. You have to get like all the weird sinews and turkey legs out. Ugh.
Yeah. I think
eating a turkey leg is not as enjoyable experience as people pretend, and they know it. They always give up on the turkey legs.
But it is fun to be walking around like a state fairground or whatever, a medieval fair, and just chomping away at a gigantic, obscenely
It's fun.
sized.
The image is fun. The actual act of chomping down is not fun. You're like flossing your teeth with the tendons in that leg. And it's dry. It's dry, man. I would rather have a genetically modified enormous chicken leg. Not even close.
I think Patton Oswalt referred to that as mega leg when KFC was KFC.
Mega leg.
Exactly. KFC in some of the test markets had put together this like genetically altered chicken leg that was like gigantic, and they were marketing it.
Of course, that wouldn't sell. Well, I would appreciate it. Obviously, most people would not.
Well, it's the same type of thing. I'm surprised Grand Forks didn't get it because we are the part of us is like one of the KFC here is like a test market, or it was at one point. So like we would get random things, and the joke on the joke on the stand up thing was, yeah, LA may have all these movie stars, but do you have bacon flavored Sprite? No, you don't. But Omaha, Nebraska does. So like. But they were genetically modifying the chicken leg, which makes you think like we were growing something, and it went horribly wrong.
Right.
But the legs were like twice the size, or like 3 times the size, and so like it was kind of like a turkey leg. But anyway, so
that's just a tumor. Eat around it. Don't worry.
That's just additional flavor, Cap, at that point. So now that we've discussed your opinion on turkey, let's
by facts, the knowledge that I hold sacred. Like you
do hold this sacred,
so
like
generous.
Religious people hold the Bible as sacred. Like this is how they believe. This is how they act. This is how they will judge other people and how they will move forward in their lives. This does like complete you.
Yeah, okay, so here's what I'll say. I'm not going to slander religion, but the Bible takes faith. I have evidence. I'm not saying that You can, I mean, religions are great, but one of the central tenets of religion is to have faith. I have facts. This is not a religion, James. This is science.
How you're like a turkey atheist. Like that is how this is just broken down into. Like, look, it's not agnostic. No.
You have to put trust in God. That's great. It's submitting yourself to a higher being has all kinds of benefits for a lot of people. Fine. You just have to analyze the data for turkey. That's all I'm saying.
You got to look at the tape? Is that what you got to do?
You just have to look at the tape, man.
Yeah. I'm trying desperately to steer this ship back on course. And it is...
you knew as soon as we entered turkey territory that we were doomed.
I did know that, actually. You're absolutely right. Which is why I'm going to bring up Drunken Vike, who asks, I've seen a lot of criticism of John DeFilippo's play calling. Is it warranted? I haven't noticed obvious deficiencies or errors myself.
Yeah, so I talked a lot about this before the mailbag portion. I think that there are some criticisms that are worth exploring that I don't think are necessarily definitive yet. I think the no huddle thing. I saw criticism on Twitter. I think Luke Braun canvassed people like, what are your criticisms? I didn't actually see anything. And someone said, hey, they were playing a lot of single high. I don't know why you wouldn't, test the sidelines or whatever. I thought the coverage concepts they were using outside of, I think, the first drive generally were attacking the coverages that they found pretty well. So I don't really think that was a very significant problem. But it's worth I think that's worth a relook at least. I'll take a look at that again and see if that's the case. But I think the no huddle stuff is kind of whatever. And or at least, you have to take into account some context for that. And some of the other stuff is small, but he didn't call plays like a master play caller. That's the criticism, essentially, because I thought he was basically average or above average in terms of play calling.
His second question is that I'm having a small dinner for two instead of a huge Thanksgiving spread. What should I prepare the main item to be instead of the massive effort of a whole bird?
A Cornish game hen, man, that sounds great, right?
Cornish game hen, that can be decent. I've had terrible ones because the person who was making them for me was insane and not like crazy, but like we the jury find the defendant.
Oh boy!
So like any food that she was making was like questionable. If you have like a
historical association, like yeah.
Cornish game hens are just not good in my book as a result of, that.
I mean, fair. If you cook it well, they're delicious. But yeah, okay. Duck, I think, would be great.
There you go.
Also, I think that I think duck can fit the harvest theme just fine.
Or if you're trying to impress the other person, duck would be a great idea. If you're not necessarily trying to impress them, you could just do something really nice with chicken.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's totally fine, especially what they call it airline chicken for some reason, where you keep the bone on the breast. But you can end up creating some really impressive looking dishes doing that and have like some super crispy skin and stuff like that. We'll link the recipes as always for the Thanksgiving episode in the show notes, which by the way, you have, should I wait? But you've got this great thing from a YouTube channel we both watch that you want to bring up.
Actually, I was just about to mention this. What you could do instead of like focusing on the main course or on the meat is actually just blow the other person away with the side dishes. And one thing that you could potentially do is something involving mashed potatoes. Binging with Babish, which is a fantastic
phenomenal YouTube channel.
If you are not following it on YouTube or anything like that, you really should. It's totally worth it. And it's shot in a very awesome way. So one of the things that he did was sous vide mashed potatoes. What he had done was peeled and sliced 3 large russet potatoes.
I never thought of that, and I should have thought. I feel like an idiot for not having thought of that because we used to sous vide everything.
Yeah. Peel and slice 3 large russet potatoes. Add them to a vacuum seal bag, along with 12 teaspoons of butter, 1 cup of heavy cream, salt, and white pepper. Vacuum seal it and put it in 194-degree sous vide for 30 to 40 minutes. That will do it.
It's very difficult to like waterlog your potatoes because they're not in contact with water.
Exactly.
Right. The cream and the butter are warm enough to incorporate in perfectly. I mean, and it just starts absorbing them.
You may ask yourself, is 12 teaspoons of butter too much, or 1 cup of every cream too much? This is the one time a year where you're allowed to do this. It's totally fine. Remove it from the bath. Put it through a fine mesh sieve with a wooden spoon instead of doing the traditional mash on it, just because it's just going to help incorporate the butter and the cream, and whisk minimally afterwards, and that's it. And you have sous vide yourself some amazing looking mashed potatoes. Yeah. I need to buy myself a sous vide, mainly so I can do this once and just show it to you and be like, yeah, so this was totally worth it.
Yeah. I mean, sous vide immersion circulators are incredible. I love them. We've done 24-hour short ribs in them that have tasted delicious. We've kept steaks in them that have been just phenomenal, perfectly cooked. They're incredible. They do vegetables super well. Yeah, I mean, sous vide cooking is just incredible, and this application is just phenomenal. In previous years, so Dusty gave us a recipe a while back where instead of using water, we would boil the potatoes over a long period of time in cream with garlic and butter. And it was too much cream, right? So you'd take out your potatoes and then put in a small amount of cream, and then you'd be left with this really starchy cream that you could use to make sauces that was really garlicky and delicious. And then you'd end up with these awesome mashed potatoes as well. But I mean, this is kind of a version of that is a lot less effort and uses a lot less cream, when still tastes just as good probably, or even better. The only criticism that I can see people lodging, and I think it might be a fair criticism, is that a lot of people do like chunky mashed potatoes. I love chunky mashed potatoes. You don't end up with chunky mashed potatoes with this version because you're pushing it through a sieve. And it sounds like maybe you need to push it through a sieve. If not, you could push most of it through a sieve, reserve some of your chunks, then kind of just mix that in. And if that works out well, that works out well. But that's just something to keep in mind. Also, I always throw in a couple of red skin potatoes. I like mixing the potatoes up. So you have some russets, and their starch content is a different type of starch content from waxy potatoes that prevents it from getting gluey. Which is one of the big problems with mashed potatoes. But I always throw in a couple of reds because I think the flavor contrast is great. Plus, you get to put the red skin. Or russets, you can't put the skin in. With reds, you can put the skin in, and it's delicious.
I also did something from Binging with Babish for the cranberry sauce, which was kind of cool. I did 1 pound of cranberries, 1 cup of sugar, a quarter cup of red wine, 1.5 cups water, 1 cinnamon stick, half a teaspoon of grated nutmeg, juice of an orange, and good chunk of the peel, and just put in the saucepan, simmered, and let it get to thick consistency. And I have it canned at the moment because there was no way I was going to be able to eat it when I was just testing it out. But wow, was that potent. That was quite flavorful. That was very, very good. I was quite pleased with that. That's actually from the episode where he did the moist maker. The Thanksgiving sandwich. Yeah,
that's right. That might be the first episode that he did that got big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
wow.
Because it's the moist maker, and he literally made a turkey for it. So it was fantastic. Let's see. What do we have? Oh, Adam West. Will the Vikings ever stop trying to get 2 yards up the middle from 12 personnel, all in tight? It fails most of the time.
Not this year. They're always going to try, man. They're always going to try.
God, that annoyed me on that first drive. Really? You couldn't have thrown play action on that? Everyone thought that was going up the middle.
Yeah.
Even the dead that vote in Illinois were just waiting for that. This was coming. Also, the best Vikings Thanksgiving side dish are puff pastries with no filling, just hot air. Aw.
Jeez. Someone's down on the Vikings, man.
Just a bit. Zen Cupid, I was asked to bring just a veggie tray to my sister's Thanksgiving. Should I be relieved or insulted that I wasn't asked to cook a side?
Insulted, but I always like cooking, and so it's never really a hassle to me.
Insulted, but bring something in the way of wine or juice. Something.
Yeah, I've also seen there's this episode of Good Eats where he's like, okay, well, if you're going to do crudité, here's how you do, which is the vegetable platter. Here's how to do crudité amazingly, which if you wanted to put effort into it, track down that episode. I'll see if I can and put it in the show notes. But
if not, just go to Rainbow or Cub.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's really just like Do you really want to? I mean, you're Minnesotan, so obviously you want to be passive aggressive. But is this how you want to do it?
Just go right in on the passive aggressive. Also, since we know that Turkey is garbage meat, who on the Vikings offense, including John DeFilippo, is currently acting as the team's turkey?
Well, I mean, the reason it's a garbage meat is because it's got a very narrow margin of error, and that it couldn't be improved with one of where it's good, it couldn't be improved with a number of other better versions of it, right? I mean, that sounds like Kirk Cousins to me.
He's the turkey, huh?
Right, like you could end up having a wonderful game from Kirk Cousins, but everything kind of has to go right?
On Thursday, I'm going to tweet out that my turkey is in fact a work in progress.
Right, yeah. If everything has to go right, God, maybe a better quarterback would have been pretty like an actual good quarterback. I shouldn't say actual good. Cousins is fine, but a good quarterback would have been able to really take care of what a great supporting cast and play calling could do for you. So I feel like that fits Cousins pretty well.
So the fella who asked for some shade on Kirk Cousins, granted.
There you go. Yeah,
granted. Don from Ohio, I'm conflicted. Kyle Slaby says I need to be optimistic about this team for the rest of the season. Kyle Segal thinks I should embrace the darkness so that the eventual playoff loss won't be as painful. Who should I listen to?
I think you should listen to Kyle and then Kyle. I would say I think that you should not necessarily be optimistic about this team, but I think you should definitely not be pessimistic. It's a team where I think the coaches are very good. I think the talent is all there. And so you just kind of have to make sure it coheres. And I think that they can win enough games to get to the playoffs. I don't know that this team can beat the Rams right in the playoffs or beat this version of the Saints in the playoffs. So I'm not going to say you shouldn't guard yourselves against the possibility of a crushing loss. You should. But I mean, don't throw yourself in the pit of despair too early. Besides, if you do that, where's the fun?
Part of the fun about being a Vikings fan is just wondering how everything's going to get worse.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Final question. What's more toxic, the infighting on Vikings Twitter after a loss or having dry turkey as your main course for Thanksgiving?
Definitely the second. I revel in the first. Fans of every team, this is not Viking specific or Packers specific, but fans of every team are incredibly unreasonable. And so when a loss occurs, they're either, if you're a Browns fan or a Jets fan, they're just like, wow, football sucks, as evidenced by 20 years. And I am not going to care about this team again. And the next Sunday they care about it, and that's fine. Or it's a team that has dreams, right? Like the Vikings, and you're like, well, I don't know why I believe they kick me in the teeth every time. Or it could be a team that's good, and after a loss, they're just I told you our greatest quarterback of all time ever was the problem. Whether it's Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers, why don't people bring in Nick Mullins or whatever? He looks good.
Or Mark Sanchez, apparently.
Right? Yeah. So
that's still I can't.
Everybody's unreasonable. You got to embrace it. It can be pretty toxic and annoying and draining. And so if you have to log off, go ahead and do that. But dry turkey stays with you, man. It's bad. And you're socially obligated to be there and compliment it. Ugh. By the way, if you're not going to be convinced by my turkey takes / you listen to this episode too late and you've already got a turkey reserved, spatchcock your turkey. It's the best way to avoid, dryness errors if you're going to roast it. I guess you could deep fry it or smoke it. Those are both great. But spatchcocking essentially is to cut off the between the ribs and open it up and flatten it out.
Oh, butterflying it, yeah.
Yeah, butterflying it, yeah. And so you can even out the cooking so you don't have an uneven distribution of cooking and cook times where some of it dries out really significantly while you're waiting for the rest of it to come up to temperature. So I'll link that too. But, don't get a turkey.
If you do end up splitting it like that, if you do end up butterflying it, you can take out the spine and use that for stock. And turkey stock turns into something truly amazing. Sometimes better than the turkey itself.
Sometimes.
I knew that was coming. I knew it.
But I definitely agree that you can use the spine for stock. There's a Serious Eats link that's going to be in the show notes. That'll be about that.
So, Arif, what do you have to plug?
Well, a bunch of food blogs, I guess.
What about anything over at The Athletic?
But yeah, I've got a piece on Kirk Cousins that'll be coming out soon.
All right, so that is going to be it for this episode. We will be returning next week to hopefully talk about the victory over the Packers. Arif will have his piece about Kirk Cousins up in just a little bit, so look forward to that. If you would like to donate to the show, you can do so in one of two different ways. You can go to patreon.com/norsecode. I'm still doing it. I'm really trying. I just need to put it up on like...
I should have thrown in a Patriots when I was talking about that Patriots game.
If only. So patreon.com/norsecode or paypal.me/norsecode. Again, if you do sign up for Patreon, you will, by November 30th, you will receive the additional Christmas episode, which I should really get started on now that I'm thinking about it. So you can get that. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember to tweet that even if your turkey is in fact a work in progress. And we'll see you next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/norsecode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/norsecode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.